Welcome back to Simple Stats for STEM. In this video, we're going to look at how to make a scatter plot. And scatter plots are another graph that we can use to show the normality of our data. In previous videos, we looked at how to make histograms. And so in this video, we're going to talk about how to make a scatter plot. And a scatter plot takes two variables, two continuous variables, and relates them to one another and makes a, what you might have referred to as a dot graph. And it's something that just shows the trend of the data as it relates to each other. So I'm dealing with my sleep data and my GPA data, and we're going to run a quick scatter plot here. It's actually a pretty simple process. Before I go ahead and run the scatter plot, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to move my GPA data over here next door to the sleep data. And that's partly because in another video, they're going to need to be side by side anyway, so I'm going to just go ahead and do that now. So over here on column C, I'm just going to insert a column to the left, and then I'm just going to take my GPA data, and I'm going to copy it and paste it in right here. And then it's the same data, obviously, just moved it over here to get it side by side. Now, what I'm going to do is I need to highlight my two columns, and I'm going to include the top row. So I'm going to have my sleep data and my GPA data. All right, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to insert a chart. And when this pops up, it'll probably be, it'll be a column chart. I'm going to go ahead and change this to a scatter plot. You may also call it a scatter chart or a scatter dot. I'm going to choose a scatter chart. And then let's move this over here and we'll start cleaning this up a little bit and showing some of the information, what this is telling us. All right, so when we first look at our data, these are the data points. This is showing the various pieces of data as they relate to each other. This is basically the Cartesian coordinate plane that we work with in algebra, in which we go out to the right and then up or down. So we have our x values and our y values. So this dot right here is showing us that for 5.08 hours of sleep, someone got 1.79 for a GPA. So we go out 5.08 and up 1.79. Over here, we have gone out 6.68 and up 3.67. So really, this is just plotting points is all it is, based on the sleep and the GPA as the x values and the y values. So it's really pretty simple to understand what's going on here. So let's work on cleaning this up a little bit, and I'm going to open up the editor here. And the couple of things that we will work on here. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to click on using row 3 as headers. Now that'll pop up here in a minute, but row 3 was sleep and GPA. And so we'll have those on the graph. And you can play with some of these things and see what changes they make, but we want to go ahead and keep both of those checked for now. All right, now where things get fun is over here on the customize side. So on our chart style, excuse me, everything there looks pretty good. So let's go on to our chart and axis titles. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a chart title in here. And let's call this sleep versus GPA scatter plot. And you'll see that pop up there. You can bold that, play with that, make it look pretty. On my X and Y axes, I want these to be labeled. So I'm going to choose to do the horizontal axis title. And the horizontal axis is our hours of sleep. So that'll pop up down there. I'm going to go ahead and bold that. And I could, of course, make that bigger if I wanted to, but I'll leave it like that for now. And then the vertical axis, let's just call that GPA. And I'll bold that so it pops out there a little bit. Okay, so now I have a nice little scatter plot showing the relationship of hours of sleep to GPA, how they relate. And you can see they're kind of going left to right. They're going up just slightly. We're going to talk about something here in a minute that can measure that mathematically, which is going to be pretty handy. So let's continue editing here. I was on chart and axis. So let's continue down. We'll go through the series. And things here are pretty basic. You can change the color of your dots if you like something different. I'm going to use red today. And I'm going to go and select something here that is going to give us the line of best fit. This is also called the trend line. And what this is a line that represents the trend of the data from left to right, whether it's going up or down. So you can see very quickly there, you can tell a lot about the data just by this trend line. It shows that as hours of sleep go up, GPA tends to go up. Now, we're going to understand more about this line a little bit later. But for now, that trend line, this is also called, you may also see this referred to as line of best fit. And you can actually calculate the equation for this line by hand. There's a formula for that. Or you can ask Google Sheets to do that for you, which is what we're going to do here in just a moment. And so we've got our trend line there. And this right here, show R squared. I'm going to pop that in. We're going to take it back out in a minute. But this is interesting, and we're going to come back to this in another video. But this is what we call the effect size. This is telling us how much effect sleep has on GPA and vice versa. And up here at the top, we see R squared, 0.063. If I change that to a percent, that would be 6.3%. And that tells me that sleep is having an effect on GPA, but it's not really a very big effect. In fact, we could say it this way. If our effect is 6.3%, I would say that 6.3% of GPA is being accounted for by the hours of sleep. So this is not a real big effect, but it's not anything to ignore either. We wouldn't necessarily expect to have 100% here, or even 50% would be very big. So an effect of 0.063 is not huge, but it's something to take note of. And we're going to come back to that in our correlation analysis in a few minutes on the other video. But for right now, I just wanted to point that out and explain that briefly. That's going to become much more important in another video. So for now, I'm just going to drop that back off so it's just not in the way. Something I want to do here, though, is labeling the trend line. And I'm going to choose to label that with an equation. Now, when this equation appears, it should look familiar. If you've taken a little bit of algebra, especially algebra, when you start getting to algebra 1, this is the slope-intercept equation for this trend line. So slope-intercept form is usually is always in the form of y equals mx plus b. That should be something you've learned in algebra. This equation is in that form. So we could write this equation as y equals 0.211x plus 1.56. And where this becomes very valuable is that I can use this to predict. I can, with at least a little bit of certainty, predict how much someone's sleep pattern is going to affect their GPA. So let's say that I've got some friends at school, and I say, hey, I can predict your GPA based on how much sleep you get every night. I can use this equation to do that. So I could say, if I have a friend who says, okay, fine, I sleep, 5.75 hours every night, I can say, well, I'm going to use this equation to predict your GPA. So I could even change this equation a little bit further and say GPA equals 0.211 times sleep plus 1.56. Now, this is not a perfect prediction equation. It will, at some point, it will stop being helpful, but it's a very useful thing right now. In fact, I'm going to build an equation right here. I'm going to build a formula. I'm going to tell Google to take and do this equation. I'm going to say take 0.211 and multiply it by 5.75 hours of sleep. And I'm going to put that in parentheses so the order of operations helps me. And I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and add on 1.56. So once I hit enter, it'll give me a value, and that is my friend's expected GPA. If they get 5.75 hours of sleep, then they can expect potentially to have a GPA of 2.77. Now, that's not 100% accurate. In fact, it's only about 6.3%. As far as the effect goes, I can only really explain 6.3% of this GPA on the amount of sleep. But it is a prediction model. So it's fun to play with, and it's interesting what this is useful for in helping us to predict the future or the past or any of these values here on this line. So that is a quick run through of how to create a scatter plot, how to find the trend line, and then how to find the line of best fit equation for that trend line. And we'll revisit that to some extent in the video on correlation, because that becomes more important when we get into that correlation analysis. But for right now, that's just some of the basics of how to create a scatter plot. And that's a good way to graphically show what's going on with your data, and then take it even a step further and show the equation that can be useful for predicting other hours of sleep and GPA that are not necessarily on the graph. So it's a very powerful tool.